Hello, people of the world, and welcome to TV Papua News of October 2013. Covering ongoing crackdowns on peaceful protests, police and military officers torture civilians, Asian Human Rights Commission report on neglected genocide, Australia refuses West Papuan refugees, West Papua governor says doors are open to foreign journalists and NGOs. And Dutch educational and politics still cover up situation in West Papua. We start with ongoing crackdowns on peaceful protest. To commemorate the 5th anniversary of the International Parliamentarians for West Papua, the KMPB organized demonstrations across West Papua. The demonstration was postponed already one day out of respect for a Muslim holiday, and the organizers asked for permission from the Indonesian police. But the police chief rejected to give this permission, because of the political and separatist nature of the demonstrations, he said. And some demonstrations still went ahead, under the presence of heavily armed forces, combined from Indonesian police, Indonesian military and armed people in plain clothes. Also, for the 2nd anniversary of the 3rd People Congress this month, demonstrations were organized. And again, Indonesian security forces disrupted the demonstrations across West Papua. For example, reports say that in Fakfak 22 peaceful protesters were arrested, and in Sentani security forces blocked the grave of West Papuan leader Thais Elewai, which was part of the demonstration. Police and military officers torture civilians. In Wamena, police have arrested a civilian after complaints that a drunk man was making noise in a residential area. He was taken to a nearby police office where he was tortured by both police and military officers. The day after, he was released and he is now recovering from injuries. In Enarola Tali, a journalist of Bintang, Papua was stopped and searched while riding his motorcycle. When they found a wig, he was asked what it was for, and when he didn't answer correctly, he was beaten by 3 police officers and taken to a nearby police office. In the police office, he was told by another police officer that they had been conducting a security operation since January and that they were all suffering from a lack of sleep. He was released 30 minutes later. And the next day, when he went to the police office to fill in a complaint, Chief of the District Police called him to apologize for the behavior of his officers. And the complaint was taken in later the day by the police. However, mostly little action follows after similar complaints. Asian Human Rights Commission report on the neglected genocide. A recent detailed report of the Asian Human Rights Commission shows violating the human rights of West Papuans is nothing new. The report is called The Neglected Genocide and contains a series of human rights abuses during the military operations in 77-78 in the Central Highlands. The report states at least 4,000 Papuans were killed and many villages were destroyed, and torture and ill treatment of Papuans by the Indonesian army occurred on a regular basis.
Welcome to Human Rights Asia Weekly Roundup. The HRC and Human Rights and Peace for Papua, or ICP, have compiled a report on the human rights abuses that took place in the Central Highlands of Papua, Indonesia, during 1977 until 1978. Let's take a look at some of the content of this report. Earlier we spoke with HRC's Basil Fernando about his expectations in releasing this report.
The first expectation is that such a large-scale killing be recognized both by the Indonesian government as well as the neighboring countries such as Australia and other neighboring countries and by UN and others to come to a recognition of this. Now, a recognition would require investigations. The cause is that these separate people are being dominated, their natural resources are being expropriated by the Indonesian government without giving them the right to participate, to right to share in their resources, benefit from their resources. This is being denied. Now these are the issues which require international discussion and a local discussion. I don't see how the Indonesian civil society, intellectuals and others could ignore such a discussion.
Australia refuses West Papuan refugees. More pressure was added on the relationship between Indonesia and Australia when 3 Papuan students entered the Australian consulate in Bali to seek refuge and attention for the human rights violations being committed by the Indonesian security forces, with the support of Western governments like Australia. Representatives from both governments attended an APEC summit at that moment, which was held in Bali as well. Australian government officials stated that the students did not seek refuge and left voluntarily on the same day. However, other resources state the students left under threats of the Australian Consul General to arrest them. The 3 students are now said to be in hiding. 7 other Papuan refugees of West Papua were sent to Papua New Guinea after seeking asylum in Australia, which is a recent policy of their government. The 7 refugees supported the arrival of Australian-launched Freedom Flotilla last summer, after which they received threats from the Indonesian security forces. They are now awaiting their fate in Papua New Guinea.
The 3 West Papuans who entered the Australian consulate in Bali over the weekend are now said to be in hiding in fear for their lives. Exactly what happened after they scaled the 2-metre-high fence of the Australian compound in the early hours of Sunday morning remains the subject of debate. Prime Minister Abbott insists the activists left of their own accord after delivering a letter. Reports from those in touch with the men say the Consul General Brett Farmer warned that the Indonesian army would be called if they didn't leave. Human rights lawyer Jennifer Robinson has been working with West Papuan asylum seekers, including leader-in-exile Benny Wenda, for more than a decade. She's a member of the group International Lawyers for West Papua, and she's the Director of Legal Advocacy at the Bertha Foundation in London. She joins us now from our office in Westminster. Jennifer Robinson, welcome to Late Line.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
The West Papuan issue is on our doorstep and involves our biggest and most important neighbour. How much recognition does the independence cause have in the rest of the world?
It is increasingly gaining recognition, I think, particularly within the Melanesian Spearhead Group and other countries within the region. But historically, Australia has always supported Indonesia's claim to territorial integrity. The background context to this current dispute is, of course, the disputed territory of West Papua, which was annexed by Indonesia in circumstances that international law academics have said amount to a grave breach of the right to self-determination. Since that time, it's estimated that more than hundreds of thousands of West Papuans have been killed by Indonesian forces, and that repression and discrimination continues today. So it's in that context that the 3 West Papuans entered the consulate seeking protection from Australia and seeking that Australia starts raising human rights concerns in light of this ongoing human rights abuse.
Now, you represent the leader of the Free West Papua movement, who now has a political asylum in Britain. He recently said the entire province had been enslaved by the Indonesian military, and he described the situation as genocide. What's the evidence for that?
It's not just Benny Wenda who's making the claim of genocide. Academics at Sydney University have also made the claim that it is a slow-moving genocide. This is on the basis that it's a heavily militarised region, and as I said before, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed or disappeared by the Indonesian forces. Today, the situation remains incredibly difficult. Peaceful activists who dare to speak out against human rights abuse or, more sensitively for Indonesia, raise concerns about asking for a referendum for self-determination are routinely arrested, beaten and tortured. This is a very serious situation and one that the international community has not to date paid sufficient attention to.
I know you haven't spoken directly to the 3 West Papuan men who entered the Australian consulate in Bali over the weekend, but what do you think they were hoping to achieve by their act?
I understand that they are now in Bali and hiding out of concern for their safety. It is clear from the face of the open letter that has been published in The Guardian, that they were seeking that the Australian government raise human rights concerns in West Papua and ask Indonesia to allow international observers and foreign journalists entry to West Papua to verify what's going on.
West Papua governor says doors are open to foreign journalists and NGOs. West Papua has now been reopened for international journalists and NGOs, according to Papuan Governor Lucas Nmb. For years, the Indonesian administration has rejected international journalists and NGOs, or made it impossible for them to do their work in West Papua. This, in order to keep the human rights violations in West Papua quiet, and to stop international aid for the development of the Papuans. The Indonesian Foreign Minister's office have not reacted on the statement of Governor Nmb, which raises the question if this is a statement backed up by the Indonesian government in Jakarta. Australian Green MP Di Natale, however, said he wants to put it to the test and is organizing a delegation to visit West Papua, also inviting journalists and human rights groups. Dutch education and politics still cover up situation in West Papua. The last month, the UN started an investigation on racist aspects of Black Pete celebrations during the St. Nicholas holiday in the Netherlands. This provoked many Dutch people, and they gather in the governmental city of The Hague for a protest, stating the UN is not to change cultural holidays. And also a member of the Dutch Papuan community, Tilly Kashepo, went to this meeting, in solidarity with the Dutch people, and to remind the UN it still has unfinished business in West Papua that should be properly investigated. As soon as she reached the demonstration, she was met with an angry group of people who thought she was against Black Pete. She tried to explain she came in solidarity, but this was met with more anger. The crowd did not recognize the Morning Star flag and didn't know the common history together, as West Papua is a former colony of the Netherlands. This situation made it painfully clear that education and politics still try to cover up the history and current situation of West Papua. Political tactics shown again recently, when the Dutch people stopped their government to sell military tanks to the Indonesian army because of their image as human rights violators. The defense minister of the Dutch government hurried to say sorry to the Indonesians, to restore relationship and to secure the interests of Western corporations in Indonesia and West Papua. And now both governments are discussing a new deal to sell Navy ships, technology and training, saying to the Dutch people, Navy material cannot be used on the land. This was TV Papua News, and we thank you for watching.